Hey everybody, welcome to this edition of Bird Brain 66 with your hosts. I'm Brian Bretsch. Hey Andy, and tell everybody where you're in cyberspace.
On your left or right, wherever. And there's a guy but below us too. So I see him too. So
Well, we will introduce our guest this evening. He is Dave Luecking. And Dave, before I turn the mic over to you for just a second, uh, Dave and I have known each other off and on since
A
1983.
long time.
It's been a long time. And we were together at the Belleville News Democrat before he took a wonderful position with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And today's show, we all just kind of want to pay our respect to the late Rick Hummel, the Commish as he was known, and just kind of want to start out by having you answer a couple of quick questions, Dave, having some
Sure.
memories, and we'll just kind of make it free flow. So when you started working at the Post-Dispatch in 1984, what was
Mhm.
your, first, chance to really rub shoulders with him or meet him, or what was your overall
Well,
first
actually, the
impression?
first was in '82, and actually before that, I did some Cardinal games when I was still in college and part time working at the News Democrat, and involved doing some Cardinal games live, and so I vaguely got to know him then, and then in '82 I covered the Cardinals part of their World Series run, and Rick was he was in his first year in his beat. I found out from reading the obituaries, and I didn't know that at the time. He's just a young dude who was helping me out, and even then, he just had a command, kindness about him, and everybody fed off them. He was kind of I don't know, I'd say he was kind of the leader of the St. Louis Riding Corps, and I was on the periphery of that, a bit player. But I mean, for myself and Pat Keefe, who was the News Democrat sports editor at the time, I mean, he made us feel like part of the group, and that sort of unexpected. Didn't really expect that from going, from coming from a small town and going with the big boys covering the World Series and that. But I mean, he was great that way.
And so, when he gets an opportunity, and I've heard tons of stories, and I've talked with him before, we'll get into some of that later. He always was just so stinking approachable. That was one thing that I always remember about him. And the other thing is, I always admired about him is I think it was almost like he would let everybody speak their opinion first, whether it was his beloved Quincy Blue Devils, the high school basketball team. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. Or it was the Cardinals. Am I correct that he was just kind of, but when he spoke, it was like, okay, here's the
It,
commish. He's,
it
he's all knowing.
right, and I was reading a column by Bernie Miklasz on the Danny Mac website, and he was talking about how Bernie would. I don't want to spoil his column. Maybe I shouldn't, but you know Bernie would have his ideas about what was going on in the game, and Rick would let him speak his mind and say, "Well, wait a minute, Buster. This is kind of what the deal is." He's like a chess player moving two or three moves ahead, or even more than that, three or four ahead. And great managers do that. And Rick also did that. And Bernie remarked it was like having a major league manager sitting next to him. And one of the things I'm most struck about in the aftermath of Rick's passing was that there was an item in the obituary about how he teased Ollie Marmol about wearing a red hoodie instead of a uniform. He had his uniform underneath. And then I noticed on the Cardinal broadcast that Ollie was indeed wearing the uniform and no hoodie. He did that the first couple of games that I saw. I don't know, frankly, if that has continued, but it's just the sign of respect from a major league manager to Rick that he would do something like that. A very quiet, very understated thing. Didn't have to say anything, just had to go out with his jersey on and sit and leave the red hoodie back in the locker room and let his coaches wear the red hoodies. So it's just a mark of respect. And that's the main thing. Rick, over the years, watching him in the Cardinal clubhouse and watching him operate, he was able to walk that fine line. And, you know, they respected him a bunch. And he would say what needed to be said, or right what needed to be said, but they respected him for it because he wasn't taking shots, you know, it was just stuck with facts. And that's a tribute to him. I mean, I guess at one time all writers tried to walk that fine line, but you know, not so much anymore. I'm really not connected with it, so I don't know for sure. But that's some of the feedback from some of the old writers I talked to. But you know, it's a different day and age. You know, I couldn't imagine Rick being on Twitter, but Bernie got him on Twitter. You know, so that was kind of cool.
So Andy and I talked, Dave, before the show, and you kind of touched on it just briefly. So what was it about him that, you know, he went about and was able to gain the players' trust so much? I mean, I never covered the Cardinals except for just a little blip in '96 when I covered an NLCS, kind of the same situation. Somebody got sick and said, "Hey, this guy can cover it." So I got to do that. Great memories. But that was, you know, a little bit more orchestrated because the National League, you know, had its players in place. But what was it again about him being able to you know, to earn that trust?
I think his genuineness and humility. It wasn't an act, you know. He wasn't, you know, putting on a show or acting kind and not really being kind. I mean, he was just the genuine article, and generous and kind and humble. I mean, those are three big traits. A friend of mine asked me, what would I say about Rick? I'd say, well, he was just kind and humble, you know, and generous with helping us out, the young guys. And I know it's got to be a huge loss for his colleagues at the Post-Dispatch who've been with him for years, and farmer colleagues that have gone on, and just the people at the ballpark. I mean, there was a neat thing in the Reds game on Monday. They showed a shot of his chair in the press box with a little red rose on it. Just very small, subtle thing. And I'm sure like Derek and Ben Friend from the Post-Dispatch and Ben Frederickson, I should say, at the Post-Dispatch, it's a loss for them. And anybody at ballpark that goes to the press box probably feels it because he was there all the time. He was there every day. And that's one of the things for me, it sort of seems surreal because I haven't been to a Cardinal game press box a few years ago covering when the A's were in town, but there was Rick, you know, kind of holding court in his little section of the press box. And it's weird to think that going up there that, you know, he won't be sitting in that perch the next time I go there.
Right.
And I'm sure for the Cardinal family that goes to the game all the time, it's like a loss in the family.
Right. So Andy, I know that you're a big listener of you know, Bernie's show, and you do a lot of reading and, you know, follow Danny Mac's stuff. So where were you when you read about it? And you got to tell the story. You had actually listened to the interview, his last interview when he was with Bernie, that, you know, the Friday before he passed. How did, you know, where were you at, or how, you know, how did it leave you feeling?
What you sent me a text, and then about the same time you sent me the text, that's when it started breaking across the you know, news wires or whatever you want to call them today, you know, social media. And it's kind of like, you know, I feel, you know, connection to, you know, the Post-Dispatch, and I have a different reason for that, and you know, Rick Hummel and all those guys that wrote, you know, back in the day. because, I went off because, as many people know, I went off into the military. So my dad would save up newspapers and mail them to me until I could actually figure out, oh, I could subscribe to these on my own. So sometimes I get them weeks late or whatever. And just so I could read. To me, that was kind of like social media then, because that's the only way I could get Cardinal information. This was before the internet. So I actually had to have newspapers, mailed to me when I was
That's
overseas.
old school.
Yeah, real old school. And then I would, occasionally they would swap games around, but Armed Forces Network, you would get to see the Cardinal games every once in a while when you're overseas. But then one of the first experience I had overseas was actually during the '87 playoffs because if you and Brian remembers that I left to go to Turkey, and I actually I had to watch everything. Like I can't remember, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. Watch all the games, so all the playoff finish the World Series and the playoffs games by the time I got overseas. So, but saying all that, but just have that. It's you identify with your hometown team whenever you move away from the area, and then just being able to follow all the guys that have been writing for the newspaper for all those years, and some of them still around, like Bernie, and these guys are still doing things, but he's doing it on the radio side of the house. And now through podcasts and streaming, you still get to listen to these guys and follow them. The same with Rick. He was on every Friday with Bernie. So it's been a real pleasure, because he tells a lot of great stories and a lot of great things about Mike Shannon, who just recently passed too. So, and that was kind of the voice of our childhood with Jack Buck and Mike Shannon, growing up in the Metro East area. So, in same thing, when you could finally, when whoever created Yahoo Sports, that's you'd be able to start listening to that about the mid '90s, when you start listening to broadcast over the computer, which was phenomenal. So, and here we are today, and and speaking of Shannon and the Commish, they put this book out together, which is a fabulous read, a lot of great stories in here. And it's just like and it's written to, it's just like Rick's telling you, every story, it's like he's talking to you when you're reading this book. So great book, and highly recommend it. So that's my take on that. Just,
So Dave, got to ask you this next question then. So since Andy's kind of transitioned a little bit over into Mike, 82, when you're talking about stringing for the News Democrat, covering the Cardinals, what was your first experience with Mr. Shannon?
I recall Mr. Shannon like holding court in Whitey's office, and those two guys telling stories and breaking everybody up. It wasn't necessarily about ball game or the team or whatever. It was just like it's like being a fly on the wall in the two friends meeting, and not meeting, but just like shooting the breeze. That was the sort of the scene in Whitey's office, like before the game, before, I'm talking early in the afternoon, like 3:30, 4 o'clock, 4:30, before they did all the stuff on field. And that's exactly what it seemed like. Two guys shooting the breeze, telling stories, and some of them you couldn't repeat, even back then. But it was just fun to be around and hear them and kind of enjoy the scene.
So I know that Rick was enshrined in Cooperstown back in 2007. I know the Cardinals probably have something bigger planned for Rick down the road. How do you want to best remember him, Dave?
Boy, I think the best memory I have of him is just seeing the joy that he had in sitting in that spot in the press box. And I can't imagine him really in any other spot. I didn't see him at the office very much, but I would say 99% of the time that I saw him over my Post-Dispatch career was sitting in that press box and, wisecracking, telling, hey, Buster, this is the way to do it, or something like that. Think about this. Or he was doing he'd do his Stan Musial, like, what do you say now? What do you say? And that was Rick impersonating Stan. And
Okay.
so it's kind of like, I don't know, among writers, I guess, Rick was sort of that character, that Stan character. Just because, he has all the attributes,
Right.
kindness, generous, humble. Humble's a big thing. I think Rick would sort of scoff or make a joke about all this attention that he's getting and what all the kind things people are saying about him. He would, I think he probably on a certain level he would enjoy it, but it's like, come on, we got a game to get ready for, kind of thing. Let's get past this and get on with the show.
Right. So one question I wanted to ask you, so how difficult is it to be a beat writer? Obviously, for folks who may not remember, Dave was the beat writer for the St. Louis Blues on behalf of the Post-Dispatch for a number of years. How difficult was that? Got a family, you, Kathleen, your son, and you're constantly on the road. I mean, I know you had your time off where they may have given it to, I can't remember who your backup was now, but for the
Tom
most part.
Wheatley.
Yeah, Tom Wheatley, that's right. So how difficult is it, and how admirable was it for Rick to hang around doing that job for 51 years?
50 years. To me, that's an incredible duration. You pay, there's a high price to pay when you're on the road all the time. Actually, before I left the road, got on the road, I would leave the house and I was thinking about how can I come home early? What do I have to do to make an early departure? And so that was kind of the sign to me that all I'm doing is thinking about coming home. It's time to stay home. So that's what I did. It's just a long time to do it. And I think, you need a new voice at some point. Derek Gould replaced me, and he's now covering the Cardinals, and it's very, very good to see him kind of succeed. Rick, although he wasn't a direct successor, but he did several years on the hockey beat and then moved over to baseball, backing up Joe Strauss. And then when Joe became ill and passed away, then Derek took over that job, and guys like him and also Jeremy Rutherford, who also covered the Blues, and he's still covering the Blues. So he's got a longer tenure than I ever even thought of having. And actually, Tom Timmerman has done backup for the Blues for, I think, since 2001 until this past year. So he's eclipsed both of us at the Post-Dispatch in terms of length of time. And it's just remarkable for a single person to be able to do that. It's a heavy toll, and you pay it and then hopefully move on. I moved on, so
Good for
no
you.
complaints about that.
Yeah.
And the guys who have come after me, they've been great, and and it's kind of cool to see the newspapers still continuing in a matter of respect. But it is it's a new era than it was even 15 years ago or whatever, with social media, and which is a total thing that I didn't ever have to think about. So it's a big workload too for
Right.
those guys.
Definitely. So Andy, you said you had a neat connection to Rick because his family at one point went to the same church in Belleville.
Yeah.
Tell us the story.
Well, I mean, just remember his kids. I remember. I mean, I was really young. I mean, I can't even I would probably say second, third grade or somewhere around there. When interact those kids and went to bowl with the kids, and just knew his kids. And I think maybe occasionally saw him. And didn't really, as a kid, you don't really realize who he is. At the particular time. Until you get a little bit older and start really digging into the newspaper. Because everything you're usually watching on television or local news at that point in time. But yeah, just every once in a while I would see him there, but not too often, because obviously he was probably on the road during those most of that time.
Correct.
Got it.
We are Golden. So we're now joined by another Dave. This is Dave Wilhelm. Dave is a former sports reporter for the Belleville News Democrat and actually covered the Cardinals for a number of years. So Dave, thank you for joining us. So just to bring everyone back up to speed, we are just paying our respect and our condolences to Rick Hummel. And for those of you just joining, we were talking earlier with Dave Luecking about some of his memories of Rick working with him at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So Dave, you got to spend many years covering the Cardinal, the beat, and I'm going to talk to you just one or two questions about that, but you really understand the Commish's love for Quincy basketball. But before I get into Quincy basketball, what was it about Rick, the Commish, how did he welcome you with open arms, the first one or two times you met him in the press box?
I knew Rick a little bit before I started working with him in the press box from, I'd see him like you at the Coswell tournament, and that's how I got to know him a little bit. And I remember seeing him there every year and thinking, wow, this is a major deal. I have a chance here at the Coswell, at a high school gym, to talk to Commish. And I remember one year, the Cardinals were going to play Dave Luecking. Well, everyone probably remembers this. The Cardinals were going to play Pedro Guerrero in the outfield, and I approached Rick one day at the Coswell tournament and said, "Are they really going to do this?" And Commish and I ended up having a great talk. And I remember thinking, "This is a major deal. I'm talking to Rick Hummel. I'd grown up reading him and wanted to write like him." And that was my first exchange with him. And then when we covered on the beat, we would talk every day. But I was always impressed with the way Commish did his job independent of everyone else. A lot of times you see people hanging on to someone and following someone and doing what they do. Not Commish. Commish had his own way of covering the team, and he would be standing oftentimes just by himself, thinking about what he's going to ask the players, the manager. And I always appreciated that. The Hummel I knew at the Coswell tournament and talked that day about Pedro Guerrero was a different Rick Hummel than I saw at the ballpark when he was in action and on the beat. And he was very, very skilled and very disciplined at the way he attacked that job. And it always impressed me the way he was so businesslike, but also, as you all know, so very personable. He wasn't an open book, but he was so kind and so professional. He was unfailingly kind, and that's hard to do in these days. Rick was always kind, and I think somebody said it best the other day. I wish I could take credit for saying this on my own. I can't because I heard it, but it's so true. Rick was a giant, but he never, ever made anyone feel small. And I think that's the ultimate compliment you can give Commish or any other man or woman on the beat covering professional sports, because he could have had an ego and he didn't. He treated everyone so kind and so professional and with so much dignity and courtesy. And we'll all miss him. We'll all very much miss him.
Yeah, Dave Luecking was talking about, being brand new in 1982. Again, Dave Luecking, talk a little bit about, how approachable he was for other writers. And then Wilhelm, I'll ask you the same question. Dave, question. So, Mr. Luecking, how approachable was he for a young?
Oh, I would say very approachable. And I covered the Collinsville tournament in probably the late 70s, early 80s. And, I was just wondering if Rick was there and I didn't notice. It's like the opportunity, like Dave says, here you're with a giant is in your presence. You have to hopefully take advantage of it and learn as much as you can. And for just now hearing Dave talk about Rick at the Collinsville tournament, it's like, shoot, I wonder if I just missed it. I wonder if he was there the whole time, and I could met him, had dealings with him then, away from the ballpark. But yeah, I mean, even like after I started at the Post, not the first couple of years, but after that, I was involved with the Cardinals. Like I was a second or third sidebar, this guy they would pull out of the bullpen. It seemed like Rick was there every day, and as was the case in those days, the beat writer kind of had sway over what was covered. He would give the marching orders more or less. And I don't know if it's like that anymore, but the beat writer would kind of decide what he's going to focus on, what a sidebar should focus on, maybe what the columnist is doing, and everybody works together, and it's kind of like it's all the beat guys at the head of it.
And Dave Wilhelm, how approachable was Commish to you? Obviously, like you were saying earlier, you had that experience, and then I'll answer that question first. How approachable was he for you, especially because you already had that relationship started from covering the Collinsville Holiday Basketball Tournament?
Oh yeah, he never wanted you to shy away from having a discussion with him. Oftentimes, he may not instigate it, but he was certainly welcoming to you if you wanted to speak with him about anything related to the Cardinals. I tried not to have conversations like that after the game when Rick was clearly in that zone. But during the game, before the game, when there was some lighthearted moments and there wasn't as much pressure before the game, yeah, he welcomed all conversations and always very welcome. Always never said, "Oh, sorry, I don't have time for you, Belleville News Democrat. You go away on with the Post-Dispatch." Again, he never pulled that on anyone. So yeah, very approachable and always willing to share information. Never one to hide anything. I mean, he may have hid things, maybe a story related professional stuff that we all do from time to time, but never did he just shoo you away like you're a little fly pestering him. Never was like that. And it's very seldom you can say that about someone. Rick was just a genuine human being. It's still hard to believe he's not going to be with us. I'll miss him at the Collinsville tournament. Brian, it just won't be the same. It will not be the same without Commish coming at the holiday tournament and cheering on the Blue Devils, because he knew high school basketball and college basketball just like he did pro baseball, and he applied it the same way. He had a memory and a brain. He could have been a coach or manager. He was 2 innings ahead of people in the game, and he was ahead of people in the high school basketball too.
Right. One of my memories, guys, and I was telling Andy this before we started this program and wanting to do this show. So I hadn't been around Rick because I stopped covering the Collinsville tournament when I got out of sports reporting. And I went to this last tournament and so thankful that I did this past season, spent time with Dave, Steve Porter, other great writers, got to see Kenny Roberts for the first time in a couple of years. So all names that people know. And, I sat down and had a conversation with Rick, stayed away from Cardinal baseball because I knew he was there to see his beloved Blue Devils. And we picked up the conversation, and Dave Wilhelm can attest to this. It was like Rick and I had never, ever, there was like whatever gap there was, he just welcomed me back and we talked, and it was now I treasure that. And I'm so happy that for whatever reasons this year, I decided to go to the tournament and just, to spend time with them and to literally watch the basketball game. And now, pun intended, now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mr. Wilhelm, in just a second here. I think he actually loved holding court, there's my pun, at the Collinsville tournament because so many people came up and talked with him, the Bob Bones of the world, et cetera, the former coaches. But it was also because they just, like you were saying earlier, Dave Wilhelm, they loved his knowledge about high school basketball.
Oh yeah, and Brian, people just enjoy being in Rick's presence. He had many people, and you probably noticed it this year or last year. He had many people who he'd never met, and they would come up and just stroll, because you can walk past the press row there, and people he didn't know would come up and say, "Hello, Mr. Hummel. I'd just like to thank you I've been reading you for years. I want to thank you for all this Cardinals content you provided," whatever they wanted to say to him. And Rick was so gracious with everyone. It could be a young kid. It could be a middle-aged person. It could be a grown man, 80 years old, male or female, whatever. And he was always appreciative of interacting with the fans or holding court, as you say. He would have time to take a couple questions from him. He didn't care. He treated people with so much respect, and that's the one staple. And I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over, but that's what Rick was about. Rick was about respect, and Rick was out giving respect and to all people, even if they didn't necessarily earn it. Rick treated people like people would want to be treated, and he'll be, again, he's just going to be missed, and it's just hard to believe that Commish won't be around anymore.
So Dave Luecking, do they make sports writers like that, or was just Rick? And I hate to use this term because I can't think of anything else. Was he just a breed apart that was just one of those rare individuals who was just had the perfect mindset to be a sports reporter?
I've ran into some of those guys in covered hockey. I mean, they were they would you go to big events and you go with a group of people to get to dinner afterwards or the bar or whatever. They tended to be like that as well to the younger guys on the beat. There was several guys in hockey, like Jim Kelly was one, Jay Greenberg. They were really welcoming to a young dude from town of Freeburg, Illinois. So, the big city guys, maybe not to Rick's extent. I mean, Rick is almost like just the humility, that he had. He might have been the cream of the crop kind of thing, but other people had that bits and pieces.
Same question to you, Dave Wilhelm.
The original question was about how easy he was to be approached. The thing, I've had so many thoughts of Rick here recently. The thing, first of all, Brian, restate the question so I don't get off on a tangent.
No. I was just saying, how approachable, yeah.
How approachable was he for me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, very much so. It didn't take long for me to be invited down to his soirees down at Missouri Bar and Grill.
Mhm.
Dave, I'm sure you've been over there too. But
Like the first night.
over and like when I was, sometimes till 3 a.m. When Rick was still drinking, which he gave up obviously, and I think he really enjoyed not doing that every night. But Rick introduced me to so many umpires. The umpires and him always got together at Missouri Bar and Grill. But he's like, "Hey, Buster, going down to Missouri Bar and Grill?" And we'd go down there but he would buy all the time and so it didn't take long to get Brian, which asking didn't take long to get into that inner circle with Commish because he enjoyed anyone who would want to talk ball with him and meet people like that he knew. But I met umpires down there with him, and Pete. One of the best stories down there was one night was Pete Vukovich. Pete Vukovich was down there, and him and R.B. Falstrom got in an argument. And everybody knows R.B. He pretty cantankerous, but he was asking Pete Vukovich who the Cardinals, who the Pirates closer was. Pete Vukovich was the Cardinals or the Pirates pitching coach back then, and he'd say, "Well, who's your closer? You don't even have a closer." And Pete Vukovich just decided, "I'm going to get in an argument with R.B. Falstrom here," and it went on and on. Pete had some drinks, RB had some drinks. It got kind of crazy, but Pete settled down a little bit later, and he needed to ride back to his hotel, and I was wanting to leave too, so I gave Pete Vukovich a ride back to his hotel, but Pete wouldn't have done that had he not known Commish. I'm sure he said, "Hey, is this guy all right? Give me a ride back home." But you met people like Pete Vukovich and all these umpires when you hung out with Commish down Missouri Bar and Grill. He knew everyone, as you know, Dave. He knew everyone. You walk in there and he commanded the room, and he was nice to everyone.
The story Bernie tells in his column about to Joe West and the owner of the bar and grill is just precious. So
yeah,
I don't want to ruin it by saying what the story is, but check out Bernie's column. It is that part is a hoot, and it's sort of Rick was kind of sly humor in that regard too, and it was all in fun. But it's a neat little story. And my wife was telling the story that she would go to her and her sister and a friend would go to Chicago for a Cardinal series, and Rick would kind of entertain them while they were there. And there was one night at an Italian restaurant or something about somebody was betting Rick money that, okay, you can't get the violin from the musician and start playing it. And so Rick called the violinist over and he started playing, and he won the $50 bet. So no background on how Rick learned violin, maybe as a child, I don't know. But it's a good story. I don't do it justice in telling it. She tells it and you want to fall over. It's so funny.
Bernie's column was outstanding. It really was. It was outstanding. It kept 3,000 words. It captured so much about Commish.
And then Dave, looking the second part of that question, besides being approachable, do you think, I mean, was, Rick just blessed with the type of mind that made him such a superior writer? And again, no knock to any of us who have ever been in journalism, but that you have your heroes. And for me, I won't speak for any of you. I know Andy for sure from what he said earlier, definitely heroes of ours, especially when we were younger and really getting into reading about the Cardinals. Did they, was he one of those rare guys who just, got into sports reporting and that was just like in his blood? Are we going to see others like that in the future?
I don't know much of a background about his parents, but he obviously inherited a great intellect and disposition. It had to come from somewhere. And so I think a lot of it is he was born that way. I mean, he's very, very intelligent. I don't know, and the gracious and kindness and humility had to come from mom and dad at some point. You don't just develop those traits on your own, I don't think. So I think he's, in a lot of ways, he was born into the perfect job at a perfect time.
What do you think, Dave? Same thing, Dave Wilhelm?
Yeah,
just perfect makeup.
Rick had this constitution about him that enabled him to approach anyone in the room, whether it's a player, a coach, a manager, or someone in management with the Cardinals, and could ask a tough question and get an answer, whereas somebody else would stumble to ask the tough question. Rick had this easygoing way about him where he could ask a question. It's an unbelievable talent where you can ask a question that's tough and cutting edge to a degree, but ask it in a way that he would get an answer. And other people, we've all been in that area, struggle to ask a question with stuff you just have to almost sometimes blurt it out. Rick was able to say it and get the answer he needed for the readers without making the guy go off on him. It was uncanny skill. It really is.
So Andy, I got to tell you, and Dave, Luecking, hold on to that thought for just a second. So Andy, I'm sharing this with you and for other people who don't understand the sports writing world for just a second. Me personally can count on all fingers and toes how many times I asked a tough question, but I managed to not ask it with the same tact and professionalism as a Rick Hummel and pissed off a coach. And it was just the end of the interview. Dave Wilhelm, I know that from experience based on coaches that we worked together with at tournaments and stuff that had happened to you. Dave Luecking, I'm sure that has happened to you as well, correct?
Oh yeah, I think it happens to everybody. But talk to Dave's point about Rick, I don't recall that ever happening when I was around the team, and I was only around the team for a short time in the 80s. And subsequent, I would just parachute in a time or two to cover something, but I don't remember any big controversy between Rick and any player or any manager or anybody. And now, people are saying all kinds of nice things, but I don't recall them ever saying anything untoward about him, like his line of questioning, being upset with something he wrote or whatever. And I touched on it earlier that, people respected him because he was a genuine article and he wasn't a phony. I hate to even say that word in conjunction with him because he was just a genuine, nice guy and well-respected and didn't take shots, didn't have errors. I don't know, special guy.
Yeah, I think the one time I remember there were two stories I remember. One Commish didn't talk about, the other one he talked about a lot, but I believe it was 2012, maybe 13, 14. I can't remember exactly. It might have been 15. The years go together when you get old like me. That he was approached, or he talked to Bryce Harper when the Cardinals played the Nationals in the playoffs, and Harper was having a tough time, and Commish asked him about what was going on, and maybe he could try this or that. Something Commish said, and Harper goes, "Well, it sounds like you should be my hitting coach," and he really a smart way. And Commish goes, well, maybe, or something like that. And then I heard later, a player from the Nationals pulled him aside and said, dude, that was Rick Hummel. You do not talk to him that way. Rick handled it perfectly. And he just, well, maybe I will, but
that
Bryce
little
Harper didn't know
laugh.
who he was.
Yeah.
He didn't know who he was. So the other story Commish tells, and he loved to tell this, I wish he was around to tell it one more time, is a story involving John Denny. There was some kind of headline in the Post-Dispatch about one of Denny's games, and Denny pulled Hummel aside the next day and said he wanted to talk to John Denny, and Denny goes, I'm not talking to you anymore. And he goes, well, let's get to the bottom of it, John. What's going on? He goes, well, I didn't like that headline the other night in the paper. And Rick calmly, well, I don't write the headlines. I go, that's cop editors to do that. I just write the content. And finally, after a few minutes, apparently John Denny understood what Hummel was saying. But then Denny looked at Hummel and said, I'm still not talking to you today. and Hummel just laughed. He said they got along perfectly after that, though. But Denny said, nope, I told you I wasn't talking today. I'm not talking today. I get what you're saying, but I'm still not talking today. But Hummel laughs at that story. He just loved telling stories. And there were so many of them, and they were all so good.
All right, so I'm going to put you both on the spot as our time is winding down. So I'll start with you, Mr. Luecking, and this may be tough to answer just because I'm just throwing it out there. Either best Rick Hummel joke or best, Rick Hummel maybe putting I don't know, that's not fair either because he never put anybody in his place. What's just, best newsroom story that may not have even been baseball related. How's that? Because you were in the newsroom.
I just remember Rick coaching a softball team, the Tempo Heavies, and we played in a Muni softball league over at Forest Park. And it was funny. He was like a major league manager of a bunch of softball stiffs. And they won the league a couple times. I mean, I don't think we won the year I was on the team, but maybe, a top ranked team, but he would call the shots like he was actually a manager taking it seriously. And he'd come out with that Stan Musial thing. What do you say now? What do you say now? And that's, that was Rick just enjoying himself. And I don't know if that's a story you were looking for, but
no, that's perfect. That's something that a lot of people don't know. I know that's exactly what I'm looking for. And Dave, Wilhelm, I bet yours is probably going to be Collinsville Holiday Tournament, but I won't put you on the spot. What's your best joke you ever heard him tell, or just favorite, encounter with him at the holiday tournament, or maybe, stand around in the press box?
Yeah, mine would be an encounter. Rick liked to laugh, and he laughed at all kinds of different things, and people laughed at his stuff too. But he liked to laugh at other people. He made other people feel like they were good entertainment too. Several years ago, way back when, probably sometime around 2000 or whatever, I take into these two words that somebody mentioned to me one time: scofflaws and ne'er-do-wells. And so one night at Busch Stadium, I said something about, we better get out of here, Commish. Got to walk to our cars and be careful about those scofflaws and ne'er-do-wells hanging around Busch Stadium. And I don't know, for whatever reason, he always loved those two words. And every time I used the word scofflaw or ne'er-do-well, he just had that familiar laugh that he'd sit there like that, Dave, like a Santa Claus. He just laughed, and it didn't matter what kind of day he was having. If you said scofflaws or ne'er-do-wells, he would laugh. And we used to tease each other too about websites. He used to, people would call me Kaiser for Kaiser Wilhelm all the years. He'd say, okay, Kaiser, what's the weather forecast tonight? I go, well, I don't know, Commissioner, I haven't checked. He goes, don't you have a website yet? Like Kaiser.net or Kaiser.org? We used to tease about what the last three letters on the website, whether it be org or net or edu or whatever. So he likes stuff like that. And then the last thing I would say is, he was the commissioner, of course, and then the guy down at Missouri Bar and Grill years ago, not Trifon and not Tina, obviously, but some guy, a shorter guy, like the guy used to be on Fantasy Island, the
Tattoo.
Yeah, tattoo. There used to be a guy sort of like that hung out around at Missouri Bar and Grill, and he'd come up to Commish. Of course, Commish had time for him. He had time for everyone, like we've been talking about. And he had a police sergeant's hat on, and he'd come up to Commish and say, you're the baseball commissioner, but I'm the police commissioner. And Commish goes, that's right, you are. And he embraced this guy. He embraced this guy like he's just a long lost friend or a relative. And that's what the essence of Rick was. He made people want to be in his presence, and he showed to other people how to behave around those people by making them feel like regular people. And that's what Commish did. He made everybody feel normal. Even if they weren't normal, Commish made you feel normal. And you could never leave Commish without feeling good about yourself and where your life was headed, because he was there to prop you up in case you were having a tough day or a tough night or whatever. Hey, don't worry about that. We'll do it again tomorrow. You know, stuff like that. He never ever said anything bad to anyone to discourage someone, ever. And that's I mean, think of that. How many people do we know like that? Not many. Not many.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to end this, because I don't know if any of us can top what you just said, Dave. So anyway, I'll get ready to wrap us up. And guys, Andy and I will ask you this one question real quickly. And all you have to do is give a thumbs up. We appreciate so much of you guys joining us on Bird Brain 66. So first, Dave, Wilhelm, would you be interested in joining us again? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Or you can give me the middle finger because you know me well enough.
No, I'll do one of these. Lift the hand. I can hang. There's not much going on this summer, so.
All right. And so Dave Luecking's under a little bit more pressure because he happens to live in my, in and about where I live. So he's going to have to come encounter with me, or maybe I'll I would never knock down Kathleen, his wife, while she's out running. So I'll strike that.
I'll just wave at you when you're going by.
So Luecking, are you a thumbs up, thumbs down?
I'm a wave.
Okay. See, look at that. Look at how diplomatic he is. Andy,
is that a good thing what he did, or is that a possibility thing?
Well,
it's like it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. There you go. There you go. Well, guys, again, greatly appreciate you joining this episode of Bird Brain 66. We will, once we get it out there, we'll make sure that we give you guys props, tag you in everything that we do. Andy will make some of the edits. So again, can't thank you enough. Both Daves, the next time we're together, we'll have, as the late Chris Duncan would say, I'll share a man soda with you somewhere, and we'll go from there. But
all right, sounds good.
Hey, everybody, just Andy and I always give the peace sign to tell everyone thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate that.
Yep. Take care, Dave.
All right.
Take care. See all you guys. Thank you.
Be good.